Greetings from another community rich in culture and tragedy, Harlem, New York. Some of us, like myself, have our origins in Ukraine. Here is an old photograph behind me of some of my great-grandparents, all of whom were killed in Ukraine after my mother's and father's my grandparents, came to the United States. They were killed about 1904 or 5 in Kyiv and Odessa. We in Harlem, New York, know there is a tragically great need in Ukraine for many thousands of children and caregivers to deal with catastrophic events, including bombings, loss of homes, perceived, witnessed atrocities, and traumatic bereavements. We have created several months ago an instrument for you, which may be helpful. We want to thank you for your love of children and your heroic efforts to create a free and safe nation for their upbringing. We hope the use of a structured psychotherapy will be effective as a form of psychological first aid during this time of often purposely inflicted cruelties and war crimes. You are suffering from deliberately inflicted terror, which is the worst kind of betrayal. Hopefully, there is a way to reduce the traumatic effects. We have had successful experiences with many traumatized children in a therapeutic preschool. In that preschool, we use a very intense psychoanalytic method, which I cannot tell you about today. But from that preschool, as Anna Freud did in her wartime nurseries, we have developed some methods which are more easily provided. One is a manualized form of a guided activity workbook, which we developed as a preventive therapy. It is self-instructing. I believe you have copies of it. The introductory chapter gives you instructions which parents, teachers, or therapists can use. We literally encourage you to use the workbook without further technical orientation. Languages in which the workbook has been translated from English include Ukrainian, Italian, Polish, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Polish, as well as Russian. The method was first used in systematic research projects by myself at the Foster Care Study Unit of Columbia University Department of Child Psychiatry. Please tell me, am I speaking too quickly? Can you follow me?
Ми маємо синхронний переклад і дуже добре вас чуємо.
Thank you. At the Foster Care Study Unit, I tested a psychoanalytic hypothesis. It was that we could use the workbook method as a measurable outcome vehicle for preventive psychotherapy. We chose to work with foster children. That is because foster children have usually been the victims of traumatic abuse, neglect, and certainly rejection and detachment from their loved objects. The psychoanalytic hypothesis tested was that the repetition compulsion of foster children to be rejected from their foster families could be reduced. Because of the enormity, the vastness of foster care, involving hundreds of thousands of children each year in the United States alone, a brief therapy was needed. We chose a written, drawn, and spoken guided narrative activity with the inclusion of the caregivers in the process. It was expected that the transformation of events into a sublimated form would measurably reduce the tendency of foster caregivers and children to reject each other. The rejection must be prevented because it causes the foster care placement to fail and enter a repetitive cycle of failures. The hypothesis was operationally tested by measuring the number of transfers per year among foster homes. A carefully matched control group was assembled, matching age, ethnicity, race, gender, and child behavioral scores. The results of using the manualized guided activity workbook showed the odds of a transfer was greatly reduced. There was a 0.01 odds of transfer comparing the advantage of the treated versus the control group. Since the original workbook, about 60,000 copies have been used in wars and disasters. A massive hurricane disaster in which the children had to be displaced into previously unknown communities and schools was also the context for using a guided activity workbook. It was called My Story About Katrina and Rita Hurricanes. Children using the workbook as an assignment for only 30 minutes a week in classrooms for several months showed a significantly reduced post-traumatic stress disorder index as studied by Baylor University, Baylor, in Louisiana. Many other such guided workbooks have been created in many languages. They're online. You can find them at the Harlem Family Institute and the Children's Psychological Health Center websites. They are very specifically designed around particular individual catastrophes. Examples include special workbooks for use in earthquakes, tornadoes, floods, the World Trade Center attack, terror attacks in Israel and Gaza, vast mudslides, tsunamis, earthquakes in Sichuan, China, and Haiti, and now my book about the war and terror in Ukraine. That Ukraine War and Terror book was created by a highly experienced trauma team, including myself, Doctors Jim Bennett, Paula Kleiger, Michael Connolly, Lois Oppenheim, Harriet Wolf, the president of the International Psychoanalytic Association, Marianne Leutzinger-Bohleber from Germany, who has worked with many refugees, and Jennifer Davids, and an illustrator, Michael McCoy. We do not have any studies yet to report about its usefulness, and we hope you will teach us about that. We encourage your attention to the PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, index in the book, or the University of California, Los Angeles PTSD index, either of which could be used early in the treatment and then repeated as a follow-up outcome measure. We at the Harlem Family Institute in New York City have a psychoanalytic training program and regularly occurring trauma treatment seminars. We sincerely urge and sincerely invite you to attend at no cost. We and the Children's Psychological Health Center in San Francisco, of which I am the medical director, are internationally minded. Harlem in New York City is a microcosm of the world. It is extraordinarily rich, like Ukraine, in diversity, rich achievements, like Ukraine, in literature, music, dance, art, science, and a place of frequent deadly warfare, often amongst child gangs, shootings, deadly fires, and traumatic deaths. In case we can help, in case we can be your brother and sister community, my colleague Paula Kleiger and I personally urge and invite Ukrainian therapists to present their trauma work for consultation and discussion with us at no financial cost. You may email me at Gilbert Kliman 2008 if you wish a consultation. We hope to learn from each other over time and improve our intended work to assist children and families in times of extraordinary stress. Again, we thank you for your heroic work, and I welcome your questions and experience so far in using this book. Thank you.
Доктор Клайман, дуже дякуємо за таке знайомство з вами сьогодні особисто, і частково люди, що присутні в цій аудиторії, бачили і мають цю книгу, а деякі навіть працюють з нею. Звичайно, що робота з нею викликає багато питань. Можливо, я задам перше, а потім всі інші долучаться до цієї розмови. В кінці цієї книги є дуже корисна така частина, присвячена дослідженню. І в ній є опитувальник психічного здоров'я, який здається нам дуже корисним. Можливо, ви трішки більше про нього зараз нам розкажете.
Well, I particularly commend to you your awareness that before the war and atrocities and terror, there were other events in the lives of many of the children and parents. And there is an enormous research now, perhaps the best research ever in child psychology and psychiatry, which refers to the effects of adverse childhood events. When harmful childhood events occur, they do add up to more than 1 + 1 + 1 childhood event. We now have information on 157,000 persons in 15 parts of the United States, which shows that the presence of multiple adverse childhood events has a logarithmic rather than arithmetic effect on both children and children who are grown up. So it behooves you to learn what you can about whether, for example, a child who has witnessed an atrocity or who may have seen terrible things done to her peers or her parents, whether that child has previously been made less resilient because of prior atrocities or adversities. That is the reason we have included this lengthy study in case it may guide you in triage so that you may select those of the thousands of children you may be seeing, keeping in mind their history as well as their recent events. Thank you for that important question.
Друзі, ми маємо час поставити питання, поділитися роздумами, пропозиціями стосовно такого інструмента, хто вже його тримав в руках, чи чує про нього зараз.
Ну, я якраз би повернулася би до тих досліджень, опитувальників, які є наприкінці книжки, тому що один цей опитувальник, який має, його можна підрахувати і дійсно зорієнтуватися, він такий вже корисний, і ми його широко використовуємо, навіть якісь такі можуть бути у нас приблизні, на нашій вибірці дані, які діти потребують такої спеціалізованої допомоги на тлі результатів цього опитувальника. Але там є дуже цікаві дві ще частини. Опитувальника дитячий, несприятливий досвід, і дорослий несприятливий досвід. Тобто як батьки, які мають несприятливий дитячий досвід, і діти. І ці дві методики, мені здаються дуже цікавими, вони якраз теж включають батьків те, щоб замислитися, як впливає їх особиста історія дитинства на стосунки з дитиною. І нам теж дає можливість так зорієнтуватися. Але в книжці у нас немає інструменту обробки цього опитувальника. Ми можемо його якісно обробляти, просто розуміти, на якісному рівні. Але, можливо, є і кількісна обробка цього опитувальника. І взагалі цікаво, як ви його використовуєте, наскільки він.
Yes. I will see if we can provide better guide to the use of the childhood questionnaire especially. But I would say that we are, as psychoanalysts and psychotherapists, just becoming convinced of transgenerational factors or what are also called epigenetic factors in childhood problems. For example, I believe that my own childhood and adult development was marked by the genocide of all of my great-grandparents, even though I never knew them. And I believe that the development of my grandparents and my parents was marked by those genocidal deaths. I know, for example, that my grandmother on my mother's side fell silent for 90 days after learning of the deaths of her family in Ukraine. She was in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in the United States when she received a letter concerning the death of all of her family in the Ukraine. The silence, I think, was important in my development, even though I was not alive. I think it influenced my parents, and I became very interested in giving a voice to children. I, for example, have devoted much of my career to helping preschool children have a voice, and I help victims of childhood abuse have a voice in courts so they can receive compensation for what has been done to them. So I can personally trace that back in time. But I think it will be particularly important if you find there is a child who has had many adverse experiences and a parent who also has had several adverse experiences, that you pay special supportive attention to that combination of adversities in two generations. I cannot say that from a scientific point of view, but I'm glad to hear that you want to do research on that, unfortunately, widespread set of data in your possession. So I will send you simpler instruments that you can use for data collection, particularly the University of California, Los Angeles PTSD Index, which was found to be favorably influenced by the use of this book in hurricanes, which involved a great deal of refugee displacement of children and families. I hope that helps answer your very important question.
Ще в мене питання, як ви радите, от якщо в родині кілька дітей, чи, наприклад, діти в класі також, да, в якоїсь групі, у нас є різні ідеї, як з цим працювати. Може, наприклад, група в класі працювати з одною книгою, да, якби робити історію війни, да, і терору, якби от, як переживається вона цією групою, класом, да, чи, наприклад, там родина працює з цією книгою, чи краще, щоб працювали окремо, там у кожної дитини була своя книга, і кожен робив свою таку історію. Чи це може бути по-різному? Ну, який у вас досвід вже в тих місцях, де ви працювали, як більше працювали сім'ї?
Yes, I have two sets of thoughts about your question, which is a very practical question, as well as theoretical and technical. First, the most powerful influence I have ever had on children's well-being is in groups of preschoolers organized with teachers and participation of parents. And there I often will have 8 or even 10 children in a class, and I speak with each child analytically, and often do a great deal of psychoanalytic work right in the classroom. It is a technique about which I would rather tell you in detail on another occasion and show you videotapes of it. But the reason I mention it is I think there is a field of information that is set up that is very useful for all the child and adult participants. It is different from an individual therapy. It includes an individual therapy, but it goes beyond an individual therapy into the psychological life of the group. I would do the same with a family. I would not separate the children in the family. If they have been exposed, as so many children have, to atrocities that they know about, even if they didn't see them, they know about the atrocities. They can help each other to remain mentalizing the otherwise unthinkable aspects. And that is best done in the evolutionarily natural setting of a group, rather than a dyad. We human beings did not evolve with dyads. We probably evolved in packs. We were probably originally hunter packs, and the children learned to communicate with each other. Schools are not an accident. Schools are part of our evolution. We learn to be socialized and to contain the unspeakable parts of ourselves as we grow in groups. So I would urge an attention to analytic thinking about the children and the parents in groups. That is, unfortunately, a very brief answer to an extremely complex and important professional question.
Дякую дуже. Да, і якби теж у нас є думки про таку користь використання саме в групах.
Thank you. If I may take the privilege, I want to say a welcome to a colleague here, Susan Siegeltuch, who has shown up and just waved her hand. She worked with me with asylum seekers at the Texas and Mexican border and did some wonderful work there, including with a suicidal child. So thank you for showing up, Susan.
Можливо, би Сюзан хотіла би поділитися своїми думками і спостереженнями в нашому просторі стосовно того, як працювати з книгою, її спостереження за тим, з чим вона має справу.
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
Я питала, чи хоче Сьюзен поділитися своїми думками стосовно сьогоднішньої розмови. Ага.
Julia is asking if Susan, I'm sorry, Sigdut would like to share some of her thoughts about her work with children.
I treat children in private practice, and I also, for a brief time, treated a child from the newly formed trauma center at Harlem Family Institute. This was a little girl who witnessed her mother, her very pregnant mother, shot in the head. And I too have trauma in my own history, like Dr. Kliman. My father's entire family was wiped out in Auschwitz. So I know about silence in families and what is not spoken about. I just wrote privately to another colleague who's here, Dr. Kliman, Shari Naxon is with us, that unless the work is done, long-standing of treatment, which I had the good fortune of having, analysis and therapy, trauma has catastrophic effects, often lifetime catastrophic effects on children where there's trauma in the family. I have 3 brothers, one is no longer alive, and all of them have suffered terribly without the benefit of therapy. So it has always been extremely important to me to work with young children, and myself, Shari Naxon, and probably another colleague through Dr. Kliman are maybe starting, we hope to start a school to implement the reflective network therapy, which is, you know, if Dr. Kliman can show you some of that work, the video work, you will learn so much, and you will see how impactful it is to treat a child, but all the children around derive benefits from that kind of work, as do the teachers and the parents. It's an amazing tool, if you will, or form of treatment to help children with measurable changes in IQ and emotional growth. I'm happy. I wrote a paper on the work that Dr. Kliman and I did in Texas. I would be happy to share that for those interested. The trauma of detention and immigration.
Я думаю, що це буде дуже корисний матеріал для нас, і ми будемо раді його отримати також, якщо буде така можливість.
I am glad that Susan mentioned the IQ gains, the intelligence quotient gains in the use of the school method. It happens that psychoanalytic work is difficult to measure. But as I found with foster children, I could measure some effects by the number of homes in which the child lived. With preschool children, we have found an astonishing regularity of intellectual growth when we apply psychoanalytic methods in groups of preschool children. And I would be happy on another occasion to share some of the work which may be of practical use in adaptation to wartime circumstances, as it is a very efficient and effective method, much more profound than the workbook, but it gave rise to the workbook.
Мені дуже імпонує думка про те, як дати можливість дітям бути почутими, повернути їм голос. Ми, працюючи з біженцями, зустрілися з ситуаціями, коли батьки не говорять з дітьми про війну. І коли ми почали працювати з книгою і запрошувати батьків на перші наші групи, ми зустрілися також із спротивом. Їх лякала назва, їх лякала тема, не всі були готові долучатися. Зараз у нас в центрі працює сімейна група, така змішана, і ми про цей досвід будемо говорити, але мені би хотілося поміркувати про цей супротив і як з ним мати справу.
Yes, the reluctance to look at the wounds is very understandable. Nobody wants to see the injuries, and nobody wants to believe that their children are thinking about or have emotions about terrible events, because we want to generally protect our children against such distress. I first encountered this resistance when I was working with bereaved children many decades ago at Albert Einstein. And I worked with Martha Wolfenstein, who did not believe that children could mourn until they were adolescent. She was wrong. It is the adults who don't want children to mourn. The children can mourn and benefit from mourning. Similarly, children who have been sexually abused or terrified by wartime events will benefit from knowing that adults can be strong enough to be a model of mentalization, as Fonagy calls it, which permits the processing of emotion and permits the sublimation. That is why the guided activity workbook is filled with opportunities which I know you skillfully use in other therapies, to draw, to tell stories, to attach newspaper articles and magazine pictures, so that the child and family can think about what is otherwise avoided and unthinkable.
Юля, Єва хоче сказати.
Не бачу. Єва, будь ласка.
Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. I don't know the workbook, but I wanted to comment and ask you if another type of resistance could be important from the side of the parents. If they just hear like something we will propose you a program which is a workbook or has some other name. There could be a very deep reaction which says, what do you know about my intimate sorrow and life? So why do you give me something which is the same for everybody? That's only the fantasy of the parent, of course. You know, we know that's very individual, but I feel sometimes the parents fear that they are just kind of given something which is just a standard thing, and they would not have the possibility to be very individual in their individual deep sorrow. So we should communicate it from the beginning, maybe, or how can we communicate it to reduce that fear of not being seen as an individual? And I think this is especially true for Ukraine, where I admire so much about Ukrainian people. I know the desire to be individuals and not agree to common things too easily.
Thank you so much for this incisive question that cuts to the heart of much resistance. You lead me to suggest that the book be called My Personal Book.
Oh, it's a historical moment.
So that it is not like a cookie cutter that makes all the cookies the same.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
When we worked with foster
Юля,
children,
покажи на українському.
Я можу показати отак.
Ага,
Схоже, ми зараз і створюємо наратив. Вона стає.
Це зміни
Зараз
настройки
я
екрану.
зроблю чітко. Ми зробили її ось такою. Вона щільна, вона гарно відкривається і в ній зручно працювати. І перше, що ми зробили, коли почали з групою працювати, ми зробили її особистою.
А яким чином ви зробили її особистою?
А я тобі зараз скажу. Тут є сторіночка, така моя книжка про війну та терор в Україні, і ця обкладинка в кожної дитини своя. Вона так розмальована і підписана, що вона стає дуже індивідуальною. Ця потреба зробити книгу індивідуальною, ну, точно заложена в цьому концепті.
True Ukrainian. Thank you so much. Because Vlad and me, we developed this telling dreams in groups, which is kind of a similar, different. And also we had to personalize the folders where the children would keep the dreams, drawings and text. And these folders needed to be very individualized. And that's my question. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And I know it's time for me to stop, but I sincerely urge you to think more about children in groups. You can use this book in classes. That was done very successfully in New York and in Louisiana. But even better, I think, if you have preschools for children 2 to 6 years of age, it would be my privilege to introduce you to ways of working as psychoanalysts with children in those early childhood groups. It's perhaps my personal best work, because of the regularity with which intelligence quotient is measurably increased by working that way. We recently received an award from the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry for the evidence that children treated psychoanalytically in groups of preschoolers had almost every one of 81 children had very significant rise of intelligence, but not in the control and comparison groups. So we know we are finding a phenomenon which only psychoanalysis releases. It is a creative response to psychoanalysis in early life groups in which parents are included, peers are included, and teachers are taught how to assist the process. So I hope on another occasion we will talk about that in more depth. Thank you so much.
Thank you very
Дякуємо
much.
за цю розмову. Сподіваємося, що вона не остання. В нас буде багато тем народжуватися і народжуватися під час нашої подальшої роботи. Дякуємо за те, що ми сьогодні разом пережили, і будемо сьогоднішню зустріч закінчувати потроху. Дякуємо.
Дякую.
Юля, ти скажеш, що книжку
Thank
можна
you.
скачати? Мало ли, хто ще не знає.
Книгу можна скачати на сайті www.PAChAP.info. Вона є у вільному доступі в перекладі. Треба зареєструватися і скачати. Доктор Клайман надав нам права на розповсюдження і на переклад, то ми з задоволенням пропонуємо її всім бажаючим. Ну і ще декілька копій є твердих. Якщо там є нагальна потреба, то дайте мені знати про це.
Ви
Юля,
можете,
дуже дякую, я вже скачала.
ви
Okay.
можете силочку в групу скинути?
Так, я
Групу теж
прийшлю.
скинув, в чаті я вкинула вже, в групу я теж скинула. да.
Я пришлю, да.
Yes. You have my email, which is good to use, and the link is to Harlem Family Institute.org. Email me if you have any trouble getting it.